Greetings and welcome to this light edition of an episode of Captain's Yacht, a Star Trek The Next Generation review series done by two inner-city high school teachers. The purpose of these light episodes is to demonstrate more intermediate levels of video editing and videography for students that have the basic understanding of how podcasting works and decide they want to expand on their knowledge. An added purpose of our light episodes is to break Scholar Beta's and my discussions of Star Trek The Next Generation from a 90-minute podcast episode into smaller, more manageable pieces for you, the YouTube audience. So let's beam aboard the Captain's Yacht and see what we're all talking about today.
Welcome, fans of Star Trek, to Episode 3 of the Captain's Yacht, the podcast that takes you on a tour of Star Trek The Next Generation, episode by episode. Join us this week as we board the Captain's Yacht for a 3-episode excursion into TNG's first season. Today we're going to look at Lonely Among Us, Justice, and The Battle. I am your host, Scholar Beta, at Scholar Beta on all social media, and I'm joined by my co-host, Captain Kanaka.
Hello.
And without further ado, we just want to remind you that this is a podcast put together by two teachers, designed as an experiment in how to create a podcast. We are striving to learn by doing, and we just want to model students getting out there, getting messy, and trying to put together a product and learn from that.
Excellent. I'm really happy about that. And as we're learning and as we're experimenting, I have a few announcements to make on my end, on Captain Kanaka's end. If a 90-minute episode is too long for you folks, we could talk about Star Trek until this pandemic is probably over. We could easily do that. But we've attempted to reduce ourselves to 30 minutes an episode now, which totals 90 minutes total. We're going to experiment with that a little bit more today. But if that's too heavy a task for you to listen to, for some people it is, please know that there are light episodes that are now available in which I go through and I break it down episode by episode. And if you want, for example, to listen to our review of Lonely Among Us and The Battle, but maybe not Justice, you can do that now. And those get sent out about the same time the classic episodes do. And I'm extremely excited to announce something that's coming soon. I mention it in my little intro to the light episodes called Deluxe Episodes, which are small 5-minute vignettes or segments of our episodes done with video footage that's spliced in the interest of differentiation for students who have a firm understanding of how to do podcasts and want to do something more. We have that available to them. So with that said, little bit of housekeeping here. Thank you to the commenters. We've gotten a few good comments. Thank you very much. Mahalo nui loa. Now, considering we are in the beginning of developing the show, we're curious for feedback here. So either at the mid-season point, which should be a couple episodes from now, because at 3 Next Generation episodes per episodes we do, we should be about halfway through season 1 and a couple episodes. So either at the midpoint or the end of season 1, we plan on taking a brief respite from our review of Next Generation. Season 1 is, it's a tall order, I think. What do you think, dear Scholar? Yeah, it's...
First of all, I'm just honestly grateful to be on this journey with you, my friend. I'm really loving going back and look at these. I think every time we meet, we have an idea for another special episode. And so I think that's great. I think we're going to look to the comments to see what other material you all are interested in discussing, breaking down, analyzing. I'm going to keep my eyes on the episodes in season 1 and really understanding and breaking those down. And to be honest, I'm completely flexible and I'm ready to have a conversation about pilots. I'm ready to have a conversation about maybe even we do one. I was thinking Captain, where it's a TNG kickoff, where TNG then kicks them off into DS9, and we maybe talk about that, or TNG kicking off Voyager or something like that. I don't know. We'll get into that a little bit later, but hey, I think the most important thing, let's listen to the commenters, let's listen to the subscribers, see what they want to do. But you and me, let's bring our expertise on the episodes, and then we'll see where we should branch out from there. I don't know if that answered your question, but
no, it absolutely does. So you, the dear viewer, if you have an idea that you want us to discuss, we brought up last episode, briefly reviewing all the pilot episodes from the Roddenberry Berman era. Our resident scholar brought that up. I think that's a great idea. If you'd rather we talk about Picard, that is to say the CBS All Access show, we can do that. If you want to hear what our opinions are on the Kelvin universe, we can do that too. Anything you want to come up with, folks. We're interested in
we're here to talk Trek.
Hearing your input, and that's what we got. So with that in mind, are we ready to venture into our next episode, Scholar Beta?
I think so. You want me to kick it off?
If you would, I'll set the timer and we'll see where we go from there.
All right, transporters locked in. Just tell me when we're ready.
Hit it.
Let's get this thing started with episode 7 of Star Trek The Next Generation, Lonely Among Us, stardate 41249.3. So this episode starts off, let's talk about the premise and what's going down here. I really enjoyed writing the premise for this episode, so here we go. A non-corporeal entity runs loose on the Enterprise, mind-controlling first Worf, then the senior staff, and eventually overtaking the captain himself. Meanwhile, the non-mind-controlled crew members of the Enterprise struggle to keep a delicate peace between members of two alien worlds, the Antikins and the Sele, bound for a diplomatic conference. So, my friends, I wrote that on purpose. So if this feels like it's a kind of convoluted smashing two different plots together, do they have anything actually in common? Well, that might be one of the talking points we get in here in just a second. So before we get into and break down the plot even more, I just think this genre is classic trope. It is the Enterprise is moving through space and we hit a space anomaly. In this case, a non-corporeal Enterprise that's going to start, or a non-corporeal creature that's going to start mind-controlling members of the USS Enterprise. But what else do we have? What are some other tropes going on in the background? We have the Federation as diplomats. This is going to be in 20 or 30 episodes of Trek, TNG, etc. The Federation, they're legendary diplomats. The Enterprise D is the greatest diplomatic conference room suite of all time. So we're going to be spending some time there. What else we have going on? We have mind control and body control. Classic. We're going to get that a whole bunch. We're going to have an impersonated Captain Picard. The captain isn't himself. Do we need to relieve him of duty? That discussion's going to happen a whole bunch. And then I'm calling this last trope the non-corporeal among us. We're going to get a lot of non-corporeal entities in TNG. And, for better or for worse, we're going to have to deal with them as they run amok on the Enterprise. So, Captain, why don't you break down some things that were going on behind the scenes?
Excellent. So with that in mind, I mentioned this last episode, but the first season of Star Trek The Next Generation had 30 writers, which is an unheard of turnover. It is insane. And one of the reasons why that first season had such a high turnover is because Gene Roddenberry had a long list of restrictions for the writers. In this Next Generation universe, he had a series of dictums and a series of rules which you could not break under any circumstances. Some of these restrictions include, as told by head writer Maurice Hurley, no money. There's no evil. Yeah.
Ooh.
No jealousy.
Oh.
No tension, either between the characters themselves or in a situation. And characters cannot have conflict between themselves, and no individual goals or ideas.
Whoa.
Yeah. So a lot of Star Trek fans, and this just popped up, and a lot of people justly criticized that none of these tropes were a thing, or none of these dictums were a thing in the original series. And it caused a lot of writers to chafe. Case in point, we have 30 writers having a turnover on the original show. I mean, not the first season.
Yeah.
And you have writers such as DC Fontana chafing at this idea, and her quote is so perfect here. She says, "If our people are perfect and have no problems or conflict between them, then there is no story here." Yes, Scholar Beta.
And I was just thinking, I teach writing, I teach some basic fiction writing as well, and characters wanting something but being blocked from that want, that conflict, that's basically character writing 101. So yeah, I can definitely see how some of the classical training that these writers maybe have gone through in writing characters and developing, theme through conflict, yeah, would be very tested by this list of requirements for an episode. We're going to see some of these stick more than others. The no money, kind of. The no evil, definitely not outside the Federation and even inside the Federation sometimes. I don't know about jealousy, but tension for sure is going to run between characters. The whole Picard not being good with children thing that I'm obsessed with talking about right now, that seems like tension. So
Yeah,
that's interesting. I'm glad you brought up that list. That's really fascinating. I think we should keep an eye on that as we go through these episodes and get further from the Roddenberry era, that's going to happen around season 2, 3.
definitely around season 2, 3. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up that some writers, such as David Gerald, actually liked these ideas. He liked these restrictions because it put him particularly in a new spot. And to a certain degree, DC Fontana agreed to them because in this particular script, which she wrote, she's under the name DC Fontana and not another pen name. So with that, yeah. So with that in mind, this kind of ties into what works about this episode.
Yeah,
And
take us away.
yeah, all right. So this episode is great at working around those restrictively utopian guidelines in a way that gives characters some of the layers of conflict, tension, to a certain degree, jealousy, without breaking Roddenberry's commandments. There's evil afoot on the ship. There's a mysterious murder, but it's of alien origin. And at the end, you find out that it's an alien life form trying to get home. So it's not so much evil as it is a misunderstanding. On the surface, it appears evil, but it unfolds over time. Something's not right with Picard. Lots of different problems. The entire second half of that episode is dealing with a potential evil organism dictating what Picard does. But it's okay because he's possessed by an alien intelligence. Also, every character has something to do in a way that's more or less organic to their characters. Now, this is something at the beginning of season 1 still.
Point,
yeah. So Worf has something to do, and if I were to be so bold, forgive me, this is the most screen time Worf has had in an episode. I'm willing to bet that. Data channels Sherlock Holmes for the first time. That becomes a recurring bit in later episodes. It starts here. Because of my affection for Data being on the spectrum, I noticed something interesting. He actually changes his voice inflections while mimicking Sherlock Holmes. I do something similar on the spectrum. That's one of the ways by which I communicate. For example, if I'm meeting with a parent during parent-teacher conferences, I channel Picard and I isolate the rhythm of his voice and his vocabulary, and I use that to make a good impression.
Yeah.
So that's what works for me.
That's interesting that you say, you bring us into this discussion about Data, because Data taking on the persona of, Sherlock Holmes is actually quite funny. And it's really kind of inserted really quickly into this episode. And I kind of did a double take when I looked at it. I'm like, oh, is this the first time we get the Sherlock Holmes? I kind of forgot about this. And I think it's genuinely funny when Picard says, Mr. Data, let's proceed without the pipe. I think that's honestly, it's a horrible pipe too. It's like obviously a really cheap plasticky prop, but it's hilarious. I really appreciate that. But honestly, on a deeper level, I really appreciate that it begins to use Holmes' reasoning and deduction, right? That very famous quote, when other contingencies fail, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Like that is going to be such an important framework for investigating mysteries that befall the Enterprise, that befall their planets. It's a great framework, and the fact that they tie Data to Sherlock Holmes, I really appreciate that. So I think that actually works really nicely in this episode, even though, you know, we do get him using some of that reasoning to solve this. He'll use it more in other episodes. One of my favorites of all time being Clues, but we'll
Oh
get
yeah.
into that a little bit later. But just very much love that episode. So yeah, what else? What other character moments are going down in here, Captain? What's happening
Troy
with some other members?
Troy does some psychology stuff. She does hypnosis. She does some insights into duality, which are a little bit more organic to who she is. A common criticism of her character, and as a person who teaches psychology, I tend to agree. Whenever she cites something in terms of psychology, it sounds very dry and from the manual without any kind of originality or flexibility. I don't
Oops.
know. Yep, oops. I don't know how that came to pass, but that criticism is extremely valid. But in this situation, it doesn't feel that way. It feels rather organic to her character, and she throws in a little bit of Betazoid stuff that makes it interesting. So you
Hey, I got a question for you, Captain.
yeah,
I don't want to put you on the spot here, but did they have Betazoids in the original series?
nope,
Okay, so
not to my
this is like
knowledge.
our first couple. We're developing this species, this power set, so to speak, that Betazoids have. We're developing this for the first time in TNG.
I'm going
Um,
to say with 90% certainty that they did not have Betazoids in original series. Now, considering
okay,
Roddenberry kind of has some revisionist tendencies, and that's a discussion for another time, in beta canon and stuff like that, it might be that there were Betazoids, but no, not in the original 70 odd episodes.
I just been paying attention to Troy here in these first couple episodes and really trying to think, okay, if you were a full Betazoid, would that totally break this television show? I actually have no problem with the restrictions on her feeling emotions. I think that's honestly really clever in a way to get a telepath slash a Betazoid into your story. So I was just curious. I really appreciate Troy and what they're going to do with that character as time goes on. But I don't know. I was just curious about, you know, Betazoid Legacy, if they had tried to use characters with similar powers in previous iterations of Trek. I know these are characters that they kind of are left over from the first motion picture, or they're based on those. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, maybe there was an idea and it was able to develop into something a little more unique like a Betazoid. I don't know. I just think that's this question I'm going to go look into for our next episode as well. If I
I'm
can just say,
willing to
well, oh, go ahead.
go ahead
Sorry.
after you.
Oh no, I got nothing else on Troy. I was going to talk about one of the guest appearances on here, but what? Any final thoughts on Troy or the other characters that we get to see some development in?
Well, when you take a look at Encounter at Farpoint, there's a little 5 minute explanation of what Betazoids can do and what Troy can and cannot do. So that's a little bit of
Mm-hmm.
species and world building too. That furthers my argument that they weren't featured in the original series or the Kirk Spock era. So
Yeah, you're
uh,
right. That's a great scene actually, where the Groppler says, "Oh, you brought a Betazoid to this negotiation." I like how they react very strongly to a member of that species being in the room. I think that's really cool.
definitely. And Scholar Beta, you had a very eagle-eyed approach that I completely missed in terms of the guest star that you mentioned. Who is it?
Oh yeah. Okay, I'm gonna mess up this guy's last name, but I believe it's Mark Alameo or something like that. This guy who is going to go on to play Gul Dukat in Deep Space Nine, one of my favorite villains of all time. Cardassians are really fascinating. As a really fascinating Trek species, and Gul Dukat is one of the most interesting villains. I've been watching, like I said, for subscribers who've been following us now, you know that I'm watching a lot of Deep Space Nine in the background because I don't want to get too far ahead in our TNG episodes, you know, so I don't have like 30 on my mind when we're recording. But I am watching some Deep Space Nine, and Dukat is such a dynamic villain. On one hand, he's going on away missions with Kira. On the other, He's trying to assassinate his own daughter. It's just so great actor. I'm sorry that this had to be your first appearance in like a dog costume, Mark, but you did a great job. You did a great job. And the fact that you come back and you are Gold Dukat for the next, 7 seasons of Deep Space Nine. I mean, that is just, that's awesome. Great actor. Great actor.
Definitely. And that kind of segues. You mentioned the dog costume, and that kind of segues into what doesn't. And I'll let you take this away, Scholar Beta.
Yeah. So just thinking about this from a writing standpoint, we got 2 plot threads here. And if you can tell me how they're related, you're seeing something that I'm not. So in the A plot, you have these 2 hostile species on the Enterprise needing to reach the negotiation table before a skirmish between them breaks out. You have people in dog costumes and you have people in snake costumes. And on the other hand, you have this non-corporeal blue electricity entity running around the Enterprise mind controlling people. So, Captain, I'm asking you, and again, I don't want to put you on the spot, my friend. I didn't give you time to write a detailed book report on this, but where is the thematic or literal connection between these two? Diplomacy, mind control. What do you think? Can you stretch something for this?
If I were to guess, it would be that the Federation attempts to resolve conflicts in a quote-unquote more civilized and rational way than the other 2 species do. And because it would have been so easy, and they bring up the M word mutiny at one point in the second half of the episode regarding Picard, but they don't they don't do that. They resort to their trying to empirically figure out what's going on with these characters, what's going on with Picard, and then at the very end, it all comes full focus. But in terms of the thematic connection, I would say that it would have to be juxtaposing how the Federation handles conflict versus how these 2 quote unquote less advanced societies do. So that's definitely
I'm gonna give you an A+ for that, my friend. That was nice. That's nice. So it's all about the juxtaposition and the handling of conflict. I like that. I like that.
If I were to guess, that's what they were going for. I wrote in my notes in another episode that we're going to review that one of the episodes coming up would do better with a more defined B plot, and then you take a look at this and go, as long as it thematically connects, that's an important thing. And there's a big argument to be made that this doesn't thematically connect as well as it should.
Yes, I'm going to go with, as far as themes or non-literal interpretations of the 2 plot. I'm going to say that it's pretty threadbare.
Oh yeah.
But let's keep going. What else is up in this episode that doesn't quite strike you as working?
Well, okay, so I made a connection in which I said the Last Outpost is basically the episode Arena, the original series episode Arena redressed. And there's a little bit of that in this episode, albeit not as obvious. For example, there is a would-be subplot of involving the Ferengi bribing some of the delegates on the Enterprise to sabotage the conference at Parliament. This is almost identical to the plot of Journey to Babel, in which Orion's attempt to sabotage that conference by getting to one of the Andorian delegates. DC Fontana, who wrote this episode, said that was intentional. I don't know why, but they do bring it up. Also, there's a weird model of a classic original series shuttlecraft in the background of one of the conference rooms.
Oh, we're going to talk about that in our Enterprise interior.
So maybe I missed it, but they were. I was under the impression that they were considering admitting one of these into the Federation. Am I off on that?
Yeah, I honestly don't have any notes on that part. I'm not sure. I can't remember if they are or not. I just remember that this is negotiation. But right. Yeah, go ahead. What were you thinking along that line?
If that is true, if that assumption is true, the Antikins and the Soleil have absolutely no business being in the Federation based on their violent and aggressive antagonisms for each other. As we're going to see in future episodes, future civilizations will be denied membership in the Federation for far less.
Yeah,
And
you're absolutely right about that.
definitely. So go ahead, our resident scholar. What's going on with what doesn't work for you?
You know, I think I really did hit upon just the connection, or the disconnect in my mind between those plots. The last thing I'm just gonna say before we move on to Trek First and Facts is Captain Picard's Force Lightning. Kind of the climax. So there's this non-corporeal entity running around in the Enterprise. It's a small blue electricity, but by the time we get to the end of Act 4, we got to up the blue electricity because this is the big climax of the episode. So Picard's on the bridge, and he puts his hand on both the helm and the con, and then just they Photoshop in, for lack of a better verb, blue lightning that basically incapacitates the crew, and you can totally tell the crew has no idea what they're trying to react to. It's kind of amazing.
Yes, it
But
is.
it doesn't age well. I watched the clip in Blu-ray and on DVD. Yeah, I don't think the Blu-ray really adds anything.
It
So
doesn't.
they're always going to do strange things with non-corporeal entities in this show. For better or for worse, it's kind of an easy, quick special effects add-in. You don't need an elaborate costume or anything. But yeah, I'm going to say it doesn't work so well here. Well,
I
let's get
would
on to
agree.
the Trek First and Facts, and let's round out this episode, my friend.
So,
What notes
so
you got for us here?
this is the first bottle episode or a bottle show in the history of Next Generation. For those of you who may not know, a bottle show is an episode in which the entire story takes place on pre-existing sets without any major guest stars. This keeps costs down. Case in point, everybody on the cruise, they stay on the Enterprise. They don't go to any other ship or any other planet. And again, it's great at keeping the costs down, which they needed at the beginning of that first season. There was several multi-million dollar fall off on that. I can't believe we've gone 7 episodes without mentioning the great Michael Westmore. But yeah,
Yeah.
legendary makeup artist. He made the creature effects for the Antikins and the Soleil. Roddenberry didn't like the designs because it involved both species wearing elaborate head masks. Maybe maybe a cost issue. I don't know. Um, and with that in mind, do you have any other firsts, Scholar Beta, before we go into episode awards?
I think you basically covered it there. Let's hit up those awards.
So, and I offer a briefEkalamai because for those of you who watched the end of Where No One Has Gone Before, I didn't technically mention the award by name, but this new award I'm creating is boldly going too far, where a concept is stretched to a level which completely undermines the universe.
Mm-hmm.
The way in which they resolved losing Picard at the end of the episode is completely nonsensical. At risk of spoiling an episode that's 35 years old almost. What happens is Picard, who's possessed by the alien, goes down to transporter and beams himself out into space.
Without a
And
spacesuit on.
without a spacesuit, exactly. And everybody thinks Picard is dead, and then they start seeing random P's appearing on the computer console, all the computer consoles, and then they realize Picard's transporter pattern is still in the main transporter computer, so they beam him back that way. And the fact that that works definitely uncovers some extremely nonsensical and somewhat intense and disturbing existential connotations about the transporter. It's been done
It,
to death, but
absolutely. Other folks have talked about this endlessly, and actually, it's going to come back with good old Thomas Riker, much further down the line, like season 6 or 7, something like that. But yeah, at some point, Captain, we're going to have to talk about the fact that the transporters basically can allow for immortality in a type of like save state backups. Those of y'all who play emulators know what I mean. You play an emulator of an old school game and you accidentally jump off a cliff and your character dies, so you just back it up a couple frames and then go again. That's basically what the transporter allows you to do. So yeah, like we were talking about in this episode, the captain beans out without a spacesuit and should be really dead. But luckily they find his pattern in like the memory, the hard drive, wherever it's stored, and they rematerialize him from that. So yeah, anytime we lose a crew member off the Enterprise, couldn't we just reconstitute them from their last saved pattern. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
yes. So let's move on quickly and not talk about
Yep.
that too
And
much.
they bury it. In the writer's defense, there was a little bit of a ticking clock in that episode because it's like if we
Yeah.
got to work quickly or the pattern will degrade, and maybe that's how they sidestep it. But there should have been more resources if that were a thing, and the fact that this works, there should have been more
Yeah, think
research
about
into that. Yeah.
why didn't Bruce Maddox just, instead of taking data apart, go find his pattern, reconstitute his pattern, and take that? Anyways, let's move
Yeah.
on. Let's move
Yep.
on to Enterprise Interiors. Riker's quarters, my friend. Those of you who are watching us on YouTube, you can check out some stills we were able to pull. We are in Riker's quarters right now, talking about relieving Picard of duty. Look at that really nice. Is that a rock? Some sort of like, I don't even know what that
Yeah.
is. A really nice geological specimen there that he has put on his breakfast table. And then on the other side of his quarters, we have Troy hanging out, and I guess Riker is a fan of models and has a very large model of a shuttlecraft. It's huge.
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, that thing's colossal. I mean, look at how big that is. That's like the size of Troy's head times 3. So I love this set, crew quarters set interior here with some really goofy props. I hope we see that rock again. I'm going to be keeping an eye out for it for the rest of the time we watch this. So that's my Enterprise interior of the episode. I love this starship. Riker's quarters look, I guess, kind of comfortable. But I think that giant model is absurd and also amazing.
Yeah. It's a way of saving costs, and for whoever bought that on Christie's, because Christie's is about 15 years ago. Christie's auction house completely auctioned off all the props that were used on classic Star Trek, from original series to Voyager and Nemesis, and I wonder where that ended up, because my goodness. All right.
Nice. Okay, any other closing thoughts on Lonely Among Us, or are we about to beam out of this episode?
We're about to beam out, but I want it said, in the context of the first 7 episodes we watched, this is one of my favorites because of its thought-provoking, don't know where it's going to go, an attempt at bringing conflict between the characters in a way that doesn't break Roddenberry's 10 Commandments. They're few and far between, and this episode works pretty well. So, yeah, do you have anything else, dear scholar?
You know, I certainly do not. I'm still looking at the picture of the absurdly large model behind Troy, and they had to put something in the background. I'm glad it was that. They made a good choice.
Definitely.
All right, we ready to move on to episode 8?
Yep, with 3 minutes to spare, so let's beam out.
Excellent.
This concludes the light version of this episode. On behalf of Scholar Beta, we hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please stay tuned for deluxe versions of this episode, in which video footage will be interspliced with our commentary to enhance our podcast experience. With all that said, thank you very much for the support. Any feedback you give is appreciated because it helps the kids. And with that said, live long and prosper, e malama pono, and we'll see you next time.